questions and answers. And Greg, as we all know, is working, used to be with Audubon, and now he's with the Guardians of Martin County and does wonderful presentations and is in his own right. I can never get straight as to, you're kind of an ecologist and a biologist and everything.
I'm an ecologist.
He's everything. He's just wonderful.
But I have been around long enough to get a few gray hairs and go through a number of the wards in Martin County. So I'm pleased to have been asked to come back today to talk about small wetlands. We've heard several of the speakers talk about this win that we just had. And so some of you I know were involved with that from the get-go. But we can't believe that that war is really past us. We fought it about 8 years ago. In fact, when this issue came up, somebody asked me, don't you have a presentation about wetlands? Didn't you give it at one of these forums? And I went back, and it was at the very early era of digital photography, but I found my electronic file from, I think, 2004 that was about urban wetlands. And so certainly this change that was proposed this year was a little bit different than it was back then. But anyhow, it's an issue that will come back, so I'm very pleased that so many people got involved with it before. I was asked to speak on that before this item got pulled from the agenda for next Tuesday. So I haven't cut it out entirely, but I have changed it around a little bit. So bear with me. I know Donna advertised this as going on till 4 o'clock, so I have 40 minutes to talk to you. No, I won't do that. But I'm going to start off with acknowledging how we came to get this win at the LPA and the County Commission. And I'm going to start off by doing that with a lesson that I learned from Maggie at a County Commission meeting at least a decade ago, when she knew that there were people who were in the audience who didn't want to speak up on whatever the issue was. They didn't want to go to the voting, whatever it was. So she turned around and said, for those of you who are representing such and such or are on the positive side of this, stand up. So I'm going to do that right now with those of you who took some sort of action in this recent wetland situation, whether you came to the wetlands workshop a month ago, or you came to the LPA meeting, or you sent an email to the LPA members, or to the county commission. I'd like to start off with the sponsors of that wetland workshop. So if you're involved with either or any of these organizations, stand up as I read off the organization's names. So we're going to start off with the Conservation Alliance. I'm sure that there are a lot of conservation, and then just keep standing. So we're going to see who all's here. Do we have anybody here from Bull Sugar? Okay. Treasure Lands Foundation. Okay, thank you. The River Keeper. Anybody from the River Keeper here? Usually Marty is in attendance, but okay, yeah. The River Warriors, Gail was here, but she left. Okay, a couple more people standing up. Pegasus Foundation. Barbara was already standing, so she was taking a leaf out of Jenny's message here. The Martin County chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society. Quite a few people. Thank you very much for coming. And the Guardians of Martin County, represented by Tony Zanino. So that's most of you. If you care about wetlands, whether you're involved with one of those organizations or not, go ahead and stand up. Very good. And that is how we came to win that skirmish, and that's going to be my presentation here. I am representing the Guardians of Martin County. And I'm the ecologist who has been working in Martin County, and I've got projects in the southeast U.S. and the Bahamas and the Caribbean, and so I've been around a lot, but it's always good to be back here on my home turf, because it's a good sense of reality to compare what's going on here with what's going on everywhere else. And although Sarah gave us a very demoralizing picture of what's happening, I'm going to try to pick it up, but the reality of it is that what's going on here in Martin County is unfortunately exactly what we're facing at the state level in Tallahassee and at the federal level. So to see so many people come out on Earth Day, I thank you, and let's keep persevering. Maggie mentioned early on our comp plan, and certainly the fact that wetlands protection is one of those major tenets in the comp plan is what caused the Guardians to become involved with this issue of protecting small wetlands. The Guardians are often, I guess criticized is the right word, for being against everything. You complain against this, you don't want that. What are you for? We're for small wetlands. We're for fiscal conservancy, very definitely, smart growth. So when we heard through one of Jenny's analyses of future comp plan amendments, what was going on, we saw that there were 9, 10, 15 of them that have now made it to the point that Sarah was talking about. The Guardians took a step back and said, wow, we cannot muster the forces that oppose every one of these issues. We got to figure out what's important here and what isn't. And so what we decided to focus on was the one comp plan amendment that was going to come across the board throughout the county within the Urban Services District. The other ones, although they were startling in what you were telling us about their increases in density, now that's one piece of property and it's going to affect traffic generally at that location. What was proposed in this comp plan amendment, though, was to affect the non-tidal small wetlands throughout the Urban Services District. So the Guardians selected that as the issue that we were going to focus on. I do work for them. It's a contractual arrangement. They allocated me, approved my work authorization here to go out and kind of figure out what's going on with half-acre wetlands in Martin County. So let's first talk about some of those issues, one being the Urban Services District. It's a well-known, well-published map here within the county's mapping information database that any of you can access online to know either the primary services area, which is in the pink, or the secondary in the more lavender color. So we were trying to then figure out how to go about this whole process of dealing with what's going on. And I guess my cynicism through the years does tell me that when there are comp plan amendments, this is the equation. It is politics, and whether it's, like Maggie said, it's democracy in action, the reality of it is that the decision makers are politicians. So we have to play that game. The big key, though, in my opinion, in what gets approved and what doesn't, is the extent to which the applicant submits information that has this backup information called data and analysis. When they put it in an application for an amendment to the comp plan, they are required by our regulations to show what the need for it is and how it will affect this and that and everything else. So this particular comp plan amendment didn't have much in the way of data. Well, I won't say much, didn't have any in the way of data and analysis. They couldn't tell us how many of these half-acre wetlands are within the Urban Services District in Martin County. Is it 1, 2, is it 5, is it 10, is it 20? So that was one of the things that the Guardians asked me to look into. The next is public input, and that's why all of you are very definitely critically important to what the outcome was going to be. So when I thought this next item was going to come before the commission agenda, I thought it's going to be a challenge to mobilize the forces again. We were successful in doing it at the LPA. I have never been to an LPA meeting where there was a full house and that everybody who was there was on one side. Usually you go to an LPA meeting and there's maybe 10 people in the audience and they're just there for their own particular agenda item. But there we were, an entire room of people. So I thought, wow, that was great, but we've got to do this a couple more times. And I don't know the extent to which you all are aware of that process. So I know if I put up the whole flow chart here, Donna was going to give me the hook. But follow with me here, and I think you'll understand the process. So it starts when an application gets submitted into the county that they want to amend the comprehensive plan for something. Staff reviews it, and one of the speakers at the LPA meeting I thought, had an interesting perspective. That comp plan amendment was so lacking in information, staff probably shouldn't have even have allowed it to be on the LPA agenda. They should have said, at least give us some substance here to make this worth our time. Well, they didn't do that, so it went through the process. So the next step is, after staff reviews it, they go through, they kind of figure out what the impacts would be, and they come out with a staff report, and it's either for a recommendation for approval or denial. Well, so that from there, the next step is it goes to the LPA hearing. So Maggie strategically organized the schedule for that workshop, the wetlands workshop that was held in this room that had a standing room on the crowd. She strategically scheduled that to be just before the LPA meeting. So I'm glad that it was so helpful in bringing out people to come to the meeting, because a big key of that is public input. So from there, it goes to the first hearing at the County Commission, and that will be what's called the transmittal hearing. Some of you will recognize that phrase, and that's what was to have been this coming Tuesday. So part of Donna giving me this direction and this topic for today was to remobilize the force, because just because the LPA came out with a recommendation for denial, as staff did, you might think if you read the newspaper or something like that, it's a dead issue. It was listened to once, it's not going to go anywhere. Well, that's not the way it is. Even with the recommendation for denial, the applicant can, and in this case did, proceed forward because they felt they could go to the County Commission, and even with the recommendation of denial from the staff and from the LPA, they could still approve it. So they thought they could, and this is where I was keyed up to ask all of you to come to this coming Tuesday's meeting. So what comes out of that is the commission could have either given it a red light, and then it would have died for this cycle anyhow. They could have given it a green light or a yellow light saying, well, we don't really like this, but if you make some changes, or we're going to send it up to Tallahassee, and we're going to see what kind of an effect, what kind of input they would have. Or they could definitely give it the green light. They could jump right in behind it. So Sarah was just telling us about all of those other LPA comp plan amendments. And they're at this same point, where coming out next Tuesday's meeting, they could very likely get the green light. We were all kind of laughing about how absurd they were. And one of the questions was, are these even real? Absolutely they're real. When they come out of the commission meeting this coming Tuesday, probably with the 3-2 majority, but who knows, the next step is exactly what's going to happen here. The commission is going to send them up to Tallahassee. Tallahassee will review it. Those of you who have been around for a few years will remember something called the DCA, the Department of Community Affairs. They were the entity that was kind of our backstop on growth management issues. And at times they would look at our comp plan amendments and they would say, we don't really like this or like that. So it would come back to Martin County, or whatever county, and that would give the county the opportunity to make some changes to them, or just turn them down entirely. But the bottom line is, DCA has been replaced by Governor Scott with this group called the Department of Economic Opportunity. We can't rely on them as a backstop for any kind of prudent growth management. So what would have happened in this case is it would have come back to us with comments from DEO, likely saying, go ahead, destroy those wetlands, it would be good for your economy. So then it comes back to the county commission, and this is what we all generally refer to as the adoption hearing. This is another opportunity for public input. So I was going to have to come back to you guys, and we were going to all figure out how, back in whatever this would be, about June or July, we were going to be able to incite you all to come back to the commission a third and final time to hopefully come out with the whole red light, yellow light, green light thing, and we were going to hope that it would get adopted, it would get killed at that stage. If it didn't, though, and it got the green light, that's when it would go into implementation. And implementation could either take us this way, start bulldozing those little trashy wetlands, they don't amount to anything. Or our hope was that it was going to get that red light and we were going to continue to have those urban small wetlands. So when we come to you in the future and we ask for your assistance, don't just say, oh darn, didn't I already do that? It really takes perseverance at each step of the way for us to get to the result that we want. So Jenny was just talking about public input, and very definitely, I don't know how all of you who participated in all of that, how many of you had meetings with the commissioners. Certainly I know that there were some so that we could get the feel for what the vote might be. The correspondence is good, whether it's written letter, you know, those handwritten letters still, they carry a lot more weight than a blanket email that just goes out to all of them. Emails are good though if you don't want to do anything else. What the Guardians chose to do though is take it to the next step. And that was we read the staff report, and the staff report was pretty good. They were saying we recommend denial. But they also said, the applicant didn't provide a lot of facts about the small wetlands. And so they asked me, as a professional ecologist, have I ever done any work in small wetlands? And could I come up with any kind of scientific information that would tell us what the situation is with small wetlands? So we're going to get to that in just a minute. But then certainly attendance and speaking at both the LPA and the EOCC is important. So this was the staff report. It was pretty comprehensive on the small wetlands. A question came out about aren't there staff reports on all these other ones that Sarah was just telling us about? That there certainly are. For the most part, we think staff does a pretty good job. They do know where their bread is buttered, though, and so they have a different commission perspective now, and so we have to read those staff reports. We have to analyze not only what they say, but what they don't say, so that we can point out any errors. And so in this particular one, the staff report on the small wetlands, the staff report was pretty good. You see I've highlighted there in yellow, the applicant has not identified any particular properties which would be affected by the proposed policy. So that was to, again, back small non-tidal wetlands, less than ½ an acre in size, and within the urban services districts. So the Guardians and us trying to figure out what was going on, they asked me to, how do you even come up with how many of them there are? So I got on my Google Earth database and I started looking around, panning the entire urban services district, trying to figure out how many of these there were and where they were. And so you see, I found dozens of them, spread out from the northern county line down to Hope Sound there. And the pink line, again, is the urban services district that would have, that sets the boundary for where these would be. Now, many of these are on private property, and so you're not going to go on private property to figure them out. And the way of really determining how big a wetland it is, you have to go in there and you have to look at it, and then you essentially identify what the boundary of it is. So I can't say for sure that all these might not be 0.6 acres or 0.8 acres, but I try to be conservative and say if it was anywhere within the realm of reason, it would potentially qualify under this amendment. So for those of you who came to that previous meeting, I'm not going to go through all this, but what is the wetland? It deals with the presence or absence of wetland plants, the presence or absence of wetland soils, and the presence or absence of something like wetland hydrology, something that tells us what the long-term picture is of the water level in those wetlands. And you know, this is a great time of the year for you to be thinking about this. If you go out there walking in the wetland right now, it's probably dry as a bone. Well, that's why the agencies say you can't do a wetland assessment in March or April or even May before the rains start and just look at the presence or absence of water. You have to see whether or not the soils are there that show that in the major part of the year that there is water there. And then you have to delineate the boundary of it. So the Guardians asked me, have I ever really analyzed a small wetland? And there's only one that I ever have. It was not in Martin County because, again, Martin County has protected its small wetlands. But this is one that I was hired to analyze down on Singer Island in Palm Beach County. Let's see if I can get the right clicker to work here. This little thing right here. My client lived in the condo over here on the beach, and she was particularly interested in this little wetland. She'd go out there and she'd see various things in it, and she said, you analyze wetlands, tell me, is this good for anything or not? So I went out, I looked for birds in the mangroves and one thing or another, and over the period of several months, this is the species list that I came up with. And you see, we didn't just visit it one time. Because whether it's fish or crabs or birds or whatever, there's going to be some seasonal use of a wetland. So as you see from this, I went out in March and April, June, July, and September. This is back in 1999 to do that. You see we got different species each year, or each month that we did this. And this is by seining, dragging that net across that wetland. And so the species that were of particular interest to me in this was a baby snook down there on the bottom, a baby barracuda up at the top. And it turned out that once we saw that these were estuarine species, that even though this appeared to be a small, non-tidal wetland, well, actually there must have been a culvert somewhere underneath here going one way or another that allowed water from the Lake Worth Lagoon to get in there. So my point in giving you this information is you can't just look at something and say, this is what it is, or this is what it isn't. It takes going back into those wetlands at different times and analyzing them on a case-by-case basis. So this is one of the fallacies of the application that was put together for this comp plan amendment here, is that it was across the board, just eliminate the protection without going into the detailed analysis of any one of those wetlands. So anyhow, the Guardian said, okay, do this literature search. Tell us if these wetlands are indeed valuable or not. So I am, unfortunately, Val couldn't be here today, but my co-author on what turned out to be a 30-page scientific paper with dozens of references for published reports or one thing or another, detailed so that staff would be in a better position to fight this amendment, the various attributes for wetlands, stormwater retention, you see the whole list there, pollutant uptake, one thing or another. So they also asked me to go out and take a look at a couple of these wetlands. Go find the ones, don't trespass, but go, if there are any that are publicly accessible, go take a look at them and see if any of the ones that would be affected by this comp plan amendment provide any of these qualities that are written up in the literature search. So here's one that I found. It's within the primary urban services district. It's less than 700 feet from a little what's now a ditch, but it ends up going out to Willoughby Creek and down into the Indian River Lagoon. So at the time that I was there, back a month or two ago, you see that little bit of open water in the middle, and a pretty small amount of open water. But I can tell by the wetland vegetation, or by the vegetation that's there, that the high water table is all the way up to where I have drawn that yellow line. So just to confirm that, I looked at the Google Earth images, and if any of you that know Google Earth, there's a little time clock up there, and you can go back and see what the same area looked like at different times, different years. So here's one that I took, or a Google Earth image that I extracted off and used when it was about the situation I saw it a month or two ago. Very little open water right there in the middle of it. But then, during the rainy season, this is what happens. It gets to be, almost full. And I'm sure during hurricane kinds of conditions, real wet conditions, that wetland probably overflows. And it goes to that nearby ditch that leads to a creek, that leads to Willoughby Creek, that leads to the St. Lucie Estuary, and ultimately the Indian River Lagoon. So the whole business of water budget here, you can't say that the amount of water coming in necessarily equals to the water going out. At different times of the year, different things are going on. During the dry season, they're certainly drying down. There is some amount of stormwater recharge, but aquifer recharge. At other times of the year, it's providing sort of different benefits, we'll say. So one of those about water budgets, and we found a real good paper that talked about groundwater recharge. And we talked about that a little bit in the workshop about how we have wells, people's wells, single-family residences here in Martin County have wells into the superficial aquifer. And as we suck water out of there, we have more impervious surfaces that don't allow water to drain down. Those wells are beginning to get salty. So it's a problem, and I was able to come up with these published reports that had these kind of graphics that show how as you lose those wetlands and you replace them with impervious surfaces, you get less water soaking down to recharge that aquifer. Another one of the benefits of the small wetlands is what's it do with pollutants? And so let's just think about this for a little bit. There were storm clouds brewing over this small wetland when I went and took a look at it, but it made me think, what happens with those nutrients?